Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on what part of the world that you're in and viewing this. I hope you're all doing well. And this is our last installment. This is session 3 for our collaborate session. And I look forward to educating you perhaps on some new things and perhaps some things that you may need just a refresher on. But today we're going to focus mainly on 3 things. One, we're going to look at the Ebola virus. Then we're going to look at active threat, active shooter, and then we're just going to kind of wrap everything up with leadership and just some suggestions as to how leadership kind of is incorporated in disaster management. So now some of you have already had EMG 6305 and have already gone through that course with leadership skills and probably a little bit that we touched on active threat, active shooter. Perhaps this will be a refresher for you. Perhaps this will be something new that I'll be able to bring forth in our lecture here. But in any event, I hope that you learn something from some of these sections here. Again, just keep in mind that this is the end of our 3rd collaborate session. This is the end of our term. It's been a pleasure having you all in the course, and I do wish you all the best of luck in your academic endeavors. Should you move on a little bit further to get your PhD any place. If this is the end for your academic endeavors, I do hope that you found this very beneficial. Not only this course, but all the courses that we have here at CSU that we have to offer in regards to emergency management. Now with that, let's get into some really meaty and juicy stuff here. Let's talk about Ebola virus. Well, now you're going to look at saying, well, wait a minute, didn't we just come out of a great pandemic here? Yeah, we did, or are going through it. But let's take a look at how Ebola evolved as far as our lesson is concerned. Well, Ebola virus, that's a deadly hemorrhagic fever that does occur in the Congo as well as the areas in Africa. And we have to keep in mind that underprivileged and underserved areas as well as nations do have a dearth or a lack of opportunities to minimize some of these situations with these outbreaks. We're not able to monitor as well, and the reason for that is because it's not accessible. A lot of these things occur in very concentrated areas. However, they're not accessible, for example, for the World Health Organization to go through and being able to identify some of those shortcomings. So this basically took place here in the Republic of the Congo there in Africa, and then it kind of spread and emerged. I'm sure you all remember that once it did emerge here into the United States, that hospitals were on high alert, much like they were with SARS, in getting things rapidly organized because there's no cure. So there's no vaccine out there. So there's another one that we really had to keep an eye on. So the tests proved here that the outbreaks were caused by 2 different species with the Ebola virus. Basically 90% fatality rate in the Congo as well as a 50% fatality rate in the Sudan. That does not provide you with too many good odds once contracting this virus, and that's why it was so looked at and focused upon immediately when it came out. So basically on this slide here, what we're looking at is that this did originate in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It is a fever type virus, and thus it's leading to 50% fatality rate in the Sudan, as well as a 90% fatality rate over there in the Congo. And we can see in our next slide here that once a human has contracted the Ebola virus, it can be transmitted to another person through contact with an infected person or contact with their body fluids. Much as we see with our COVID-19 virus, this is pretty similar to that in the human-to-human transmission, as well as creating a very high fever. And that does take place, and that's what you need to be careful of with this particular virus. Also, after a person contracts the Ebola virus, further transmission occurs when the care provider may be exposed to the infected person through washing, feeding, or administering medication. Let's face it, when this is airborne, if someone happens to sneeze, we all have learned about the social distancing, and social distancing here with COVID virus is approximately 6 feet some are saying even 13 feet now. However, in our most recent studies, we see that it is 6 feet. Now, these droplets are going to be dispelled. Again, for our example here, if someone happens to sneeze, that the droplets are going to be dispelled and they're going to be approximately 3 feet in the air. Now, if it happens to be windy, obviously that is going to be a concern, as well as blowing towards that person and then carrying that a little bit further. So if you happen to be downwind, more than likely this is obviously going to be an issue should it occur. So human to human contact here is an issue that's going to be transmitted basically through bodily fluids or through a person who has been infected. And then our healthcare workers are really going to be a matter of concern to us due to the fact that they are the ones on the front line. They're the ones who are most likely to be exposed to it. They are the ones who are going to have the ability to help and assist a person with this deadly virus. However, they're going to also be the most susceptible through administering the medication, as well as washing, as well as feeding. And these are some of the key points that we need to realize here on this particular slide. Next, in looking at the Ebola virus here, those that come in close contact with patients, such as the healthcare providers, family, friends, those are the ones that are going to be mostly high at risk and becoming ill probably rather rapidly based on a person that's going to be in contact with the person here with infected bodily fluids. And the CDC in 2014 has mentioned that. Now, this has subsided in most cases. It's still out there, however, able to contain it and able to put it down in a suppressive manner due to many of the areas with treatment, isolation, etc. Now, there is no vaccine or end-all, be-all, or cure-all for this Ebola virus, like I mentioned in the previous slides. But there is a method of being able to isolate and suppress and medicate as they're going along. Now, also Ebola can be spread through direct contact with objects. And much like we're seeing with COVID, it's the same thing here with clothing, bedding, needles, medical equipment that has been contaminated with infected bodily fluids. Let's face it, and again, it's common sense. If there's anything that has been touched or with bodily fluids there that has resembled Ebola and this virus, and you're not properly protected, the chances are you're more than likely going to get this, and also more than likely going to spread it on to the next person, seeing how it is person to person. So again, family members, friends, healthcare workers are not immune to this Ebola virus. It's also something that can be easily transmitted through direct contact with bodily fluids and also through sneezing, coughing, etc. Any type of mist that is in the air as well from that sneeze will definitely create an impact on the person that happens to be in direct contact with that. So again, healthcare workers need to be well aware of their surroundings. They need to be well protected with face masks, shields, gloves, gowns, goggles, whatever it is, as well as putting the patient in isolation in order to properly care for that patient. Now, in our next slide here, it's slide 4, Ebola virus is not easy to diagnose. And the reason why is that is not easy because some of the signs and symptoms can be attributed to common illnesses. So that can be attributed to perhaps just a minor cough, a sneeze. It can be attributed to having a high fever. We all see that with the flu in our flu season. But this one is relatively dangerous because it is so contagious and it can spread so easily amongst human to human contact through bodily fluids, as well as what I had just mentioned here with coughing and sneezing. Also, additionally, this virus has been identified through the blood, and it may take up to 3 days before the virus reaches levels that it can actually be detected. Much like what we're seeing with COVID, where COVID is going to be carried perhaps with the person that appears to be healthy, that person still can be the carrier. That person may be infecting others and not know if they're not social distancing the proper way, if they're not being cleanly and washing their hands, if they're not covering their cough. All the things that we should be doing anyway and be accustomed to much during flu season, if that person is not doing, the other people are going to be highly susceptible to having that particular virus, COVID. In this case, the same thing goes with Ebola. You need to be at a high level of hygiene, and also making sure that you're not going to be respectfully sneezing on another person, or if you're going to come in contact with another person that has this illness, be very, very careful. So once again, the Ebola diagnosis is not going to be something that you're going to see immediately. It's going to take an onset with symptoms perhaps of 3 days, and some of these signs and symptoms then eventually are going to come to pass. And then additionally, we're going to be looking at being able to test it in the blood, and then take a look at the virus reaching its perhaps its peak levels within a matter of 5 days here, once it has infected that person. Then you have to be careful with what you're going to be spreading, and making sure that hands are clean, coughs are being covered, etc., and properly, especially if you're in healthcare, and then wearing the proper PPE, personal protective equipment. In looking at our next slide here for treatment-wise, well, the unfortunate thing is there's really no approved vaccine for this particular virus, and that research is being conducted and is still being conducted, but nothing right now is FDA approved. And much as with any virus, recovery is going to depend on the individual. As you recall, probably from previous classes, if you were so traumatized to have me as your professor in one of those previous classes, you will notice that I always said that it depends. My two favorite words, it depends. It depends on the type of research, it depends on the person, it depends on the illness, it depends on the situation. Much is the same as going on with the Ebola treatment here. You can tell that research is being conducted, but it depends on what is going to be found. It depends on how viral this is. It depends on the strength. It depends on the genetics, etc. We also have to realize that it's going to depend on the person. If there are previous underlying conditions that a person may have that are unknown to that person, then probably this Ebola treatment may take a little bit longer to make an impact, or a quicker recovery. And that person does have the ability to recover, but it's going to depend on the person's immune system. If that person has a low immunity, then the likelihood of that person recovering from this, unfortunately, is going to be minimal. And the ability to develop antibodies, much like we see in COVID-19, is going to play an integral role in being able to recover. Also, those antibodies might be able to be used to assist other people that perhaps are going to be exposed to this type of virus, or perhaps the antibody is going to make this person that has Ebola now immune to it, due to the fact that the antibodies are in there. Much like what we see with flu, or with measles, or with chickenpox, the same thing is going to apply, where these antibodies are going to make us a little bit more resistant, less susceptible to what we are going to be exposed to, perhaps to the flu, or in this case Ebola, and that is going to make a big difference for us in the long run as well. So understand that there is no approved vaccine. There are treatments that are out there that are being administered to minimize the effect of the virus. However, there is no vaccine. And much as with any virus, recovery is going to depend on the person. It's going to be person to person. And then the individual's immune system is going to play an integral role in how that person is going to recover, and then being able to move forward after the recovery time. Again, you're probably saying, Dr. Milan, how long is the recovery time? It depends. It depends on the immune system. It depends on how infected the person may be. It depends whether or not it's been caught in time. Much as COVID-19, if the proper mitigation practices have been taken place, then it's going to be fine. A person's immune system. Some of the celebrities had very, very few signs and symptoms of COVID-19, and they went along just fine after their 14-day quarantine. Much is the same that can happen here with Ebola. You might not have those signs and symptoms for 4 or 5 days, but then all of a sudden it may hit you right away. It might not. You might have slight signs and symptoms of this, but you just don't know. It depends on basically your immune system. Okay, moving on to our next slide here, slide 6. Let's take a look at active threat, active shooter. These are some of the things that are definitely occurring here predominantly in the United States. We have the highest incident rates for active threat, active shooter, and much of this is occurring not only within cities, but also within smaller communities as well. No one is immune to this any longer, whereas it used to be in large areas, large cities, etc., and it's now hitting our communities, unfortunately. So active threats. What is an active threat? Well, active threat or active threats are going to be situations that can happen anytime, any place, and anywhere without warning. They are going to be basically unpredictable and fluid, and they are going to evolve quickly. An example of an active threat is an active shooter situations. Now, we can use these terms interchangeably because an active threat eventually is evolving into the person that is going to be the active shooter in this situation. Keep that in mind as we move along. So this is a person who is actively causing harm, hurt, and more importantly, they're looking for a designated target. And I guess that's the best way I can express this to you, that the designated target is the person who is disgruntled. For example, if it's a disgruntled employee, that's the person that is going out there to ensure the person is with serious bodily harm or perhaps even deceased. So this activity is not really contained immediately, but can be contained within an immediate area, and the risk of death or serious injury is going to be probably very high to any potential victims. And the reason why I say this is that we recently had a shooting in one of our local hospitals here in Chicago, and one of those members of the hospital staff just happened to be walking around the corner, and unfortunately that person was shot. Wrong place, wrong time, and unfortunately this is exactly what happens during an active threat, active shooter. So an active shooter is always going to be considered a threat. That's where we get the active threat going on out there. The situation is going to be flexible. Something's going to change with any disaster in general every 2 seconds. Much is the same as going to be with this situation. Something's going to change every 2 seconds. So if the shooting stops, that does not exactly mean that the person is completed his or her scenario. This person may be reloading, planting explosives, or actively still hunting. And this is where signs and symptoms, as I refer to them, you need to be aware of your surroundings. You need to be aware of what's going on. If it becomes quiet, that does not mean that this situation is over. Again, it's going to be referring to reloading or planting explosives or whatever the person may be doing at this time. So be aware of that. And also be aware that normally now, let me take a side step back here, is the fact that normally a person is going to act by him or herself in this situation. But there are times when you're going to have one or more people that may be involved in an active shooting situation. Much as we saw at Columbine High School many years ago, that was the impetus that's pretty much awoke us to multiple shooters, multiple devices, and not being able to go in and mitigate that circumstance right away, thus causing a significant life loss, as we recall. So keep in mind that active threats are fluid situations. They can happen anytime, any place, and they are normally without warning. And they're also unpredictable, and they're going to evolve quickly and immediately. So also keep in mind that the active shooter is a person who is actively looking for death or serious bodily injury to a person or persons that may be involved. And the activity is not going to be contained immediately, but it will be contained into an area or an immediate area eventually once the active threat has reached that particular person or persons, thus causing death or serious injury to those potential victims. And an active shooter is always going to be considered a threat. Just because it's quiet out there does not mean that the situation has terminated or the person that is in question that is causing these issues has been mitigated. So it's also an idea to remember to keep your eyes and ears open, especially when the person might be planting explosives, reloading, or continually walking through and quietly going through hallways methodically. So this way that person is unbeknownst to those people that are potential victims there. In our next slide, the active threat, active shooter has a desire to kill and cause serious injury without concern for any personal safety or the threat of being captured. two things here. The active threat, active shooter has a target in mind. That's one. And two, that person, normally one person, that person does not want to confront police, SWAT, or emergency personnel. That person wants to normally finish what the intent is as well, and then all of a sudden the person, 99% of the time, the person that is involved in the shooting as the shooter will commit suicide. So they do not want to face police, they do not want to be captured, and they do not want to go to jail. The majority of the time, this is going to be the situation. Also, they oftentimes have the intended victims and will search them out. Unfortunately, there may be innocent bystanders that may be coming around the corner. They may be seated at a desk, wrong place, wrong time, and they may become victims themselves. So we have to keep that in mind as the active threat situation changes and becomes a little bit more dynamic. It accepts targets of opportunity while searching for or after finding intended victims. Just because the intended victim has been found does not mean that the active threat, active shooter is going to stop. This means that the victim has been found, and according to the active threat, active shooter, that situation has been taken care of. But normally, much like in a terrorist event, normally the active threat, active shooter is going to take out as many people as he or she can prior to leaving that area, and probably not engaging law enforcement personnel, and more than likely committing suicide, him or herself, after the situation has been terminated. And also, it's going to move throughout the building and the areas until stopped. And then law enforcement is going to play a key and integral role in being able to mitigate the active threat, active shooter. And once again, you can see here that the active shooter normally commits suicide rather than having other intervention. The majority are going to commit suicide. There are those who have been captured dealing with some of the things with movie theaters as well as political rallies, etc., because they don't have the opportunity to perhaps commit suicide, but they do have the opportunity with a large volume of people having many targets and targets of opportunity there. Keep that in mind in an open environment, especially if you're in a supermarket. Sometimes you do have heroes that are going to emerge. There's always one hero that emerges in any type of disaster or an emergency situation. And in this case, the hero can tackle the person, knock the gun away, or whatever it may be. And that's where the active shooter may not have an opportunity to commit suicide from heroic actions from other people. So keep in mind that this is a desire to kill and seriously injure without concern for personal safety of the active threat or the active shooter, as well as those that are around him or her. Oftentimes, the intended victims will be sought out, searched, and then looking for other potential targets. And then the intended victims may be killed in these situations. However, that does not mean that the other targets of opportunity that happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time may not also become targets themselves. And finally here, that the active threat, active shooter is going to continually move throughout the building. If there's going to be roadblocks, as I refer to them, meaning doors locked or something piled up against windows and glass, etc., that is not a good opportunity for the active threat or active shooter, and he or she is just going to continue should there be something that's going to be blocking him or her. And until that person is going to be stopped by law enforcement, there's going to be a lot of action that is going to be taking place. There's going to be fluid situations, and the people that are involved in these situations need to be cognizant of their surroundings, as well as being flexible in such a dynamic setting. Well, what can we do as far as emergency services management and all the alphabet police that are out there? Police departments, fire departments, emergency medical services, etc. Well, you have to take into consideration some of the following things, and this is where the educational opportunities first arise. The active threat, active shooter, they take numerous accounts in place in the media, and we look at the media almost daily, and we can see that the active threats and shooters are popping up almost every place. That's one thing we need to be cognizant of. The other thing is that we need to understand that this is not just limited to schools any longer. This is going to be administered, if you will, to churches, schools, malls, theaters, social events, big political rallies, whatever it may be. But they are going to be out there, and you need to be aware of your surroundings. Concerts, for Pete's sakes. We can't even go to concerts anymore without having an active threat, active shooter. And we see what's going on with movie theaters. Again, this is a target-rich environment, not to sound crass, but this is exactly what is taking place. It's a target-rich environment. The targets are very predominant for the active threat, active shooter to take advantage of. And again, they're looking for injuring those that are around until they can finally meet the target that they are looking for, unfortunately. And then something's going to change every 2 seconds. And I mentioned this previously and perhaps in the previous class for leadership. But keep that in mind as well, that something is going to change every 2 seconds, that something's going to be fluid. Someone is going to have perhaps a tripwire. There's going to be a door opening. There's going to be SWAT and police that are going to be entering. There's going to be a lot of radio communication. Something's going to shift and move every 2 seconds. And this is why I mentioned to you, you need to remain on high alert and be aware of your surroundings in an effort to minimize some of the things that are going to take place with this dynamic situation. And here are some examples here. We had Columbine High School many years ago. We also had Colorado, where in the movie theater, where an active threat, active shooter was in there. Plus, we've had many more theater shootings, but this was one of the very first predominant ones with a very high target-rich environment for this person here. Las Vegas, we saw what happened in Las Vegas with the concerts, as well as, unfortunately, Sandy Hook Elementary School. Again, this demonstrates a very, very big version of where things are occurring, and it's not just going to occur in schools. So we have a high school, we have a grammar school, we also have a movie theater, and we have a concert. As you can see, it's a very, very dispersed area, as well as something that you have to be aware of when you go out, unfortunately, these days. So we have numerous accounts that are taking place. Various locations are going to be included. And remember that something's going to change and be dynamic within an active threat, active shooter situation every 2 seconds. The active threat, active shooter situations are going to continue to emerge, and they're getting more and more creative, and they have copycats that are out there. Normally, these occur in threes. You will see one active threat, active shooter situation occur, and then a few days later, you'll see another one, and then finally, there'll be another one that'll occur, whether it's going to be in a place of employment or one of the other locations that I had mentioned. But remember that it'll come in threes. And it'll depend on how grandiose the situation may be or how depressed the person may be. Again, it depends. There's no set profile for the person. You probably heard me say several times, him or her, he or she. That's exactly what's going on. It's not going to be just a male or a female that's going to be perhaps in their 20s that may be disgruntled at work. It can be the 80-year-old that's disgruntled about the care and treatment of his loved one at the hospital and taking it on at a doctor or nurse. Many, many occasions have occurred throughout the United States in dealing with patients that have been quote-unquote mistreated by doctors and medical professionals, and the loved one who is up in age or age has actually come in with a firearm and taken it out on that doctor or nurse because he or she feels that his or her loved one was not treated well. Again, that's going to lead to a lot of questions and a lot of things that may be unanswered. Leadership issues with the active threat, active shooter situations. You're like, well, what can be done in these situations? How do we know the person has a gun? How do we know what to look for? Well, leadership, training, and education are kind of all combined together. Good leadership will be able to be visionaries and understand that there's going to be a dynamic workplace, and that cultural diversity is every workplace nowadays, and people believe in different things, different thoughts, different ideas, and a lot of different ideologies that may be present out there. And good leadership needs to educate others on that. Training and education are two of the things that I advocate beyond a reasonable doubt. And the reason for that is if people don't know what's going on around them or cannot see the signs and symptoms, as I mentioned before, of an active threat, active shooter situation, then that's going to leave them in a vulnerable situation. You need to allow them to understand some of these situations are going to remain fluid. You have to make sure that they understand that it's not going to be written by policy that each and every time this is going to happen a certain way. You can brace them and tell them that we think this is what might happen, but please be aware that there are going to be other situations that are going to arise that are not going to be what I refer to as textbook material, and you can't write this stuff, and that is going to happen out there as well. So just remember that these locations are continuing to emerge. Be aware of your surroundings. Understand that there's going to be various profiles that are out there for the active threat, active shooter that are not going to be just one size fits all for that person or persons that are going to be involved. And leadership will need to be involved and understand how to educate others and train others with these certain situations, even as uncomfortable as they may be. But these are some of the steps that need to be done in order to educate other people and perhaps save their lives one day. And kind of to summarize this, you have to keep in mind that training for schools, facilities, and employees, it does cost money. It's understandable. What training and education doesn't cost money, but the ROI, return on investment here, is quite high. We're talking about people's lives. That's the most important. If you're able to train and reach out and educate people on something as serious and miserable as this, then you're able to get your return on investment tenfold because you're saving people's lives and reaching out to people. And that's the main thing. Now, we do have a debate that occurs here, especially with training kids that are in school. Well, should we do this? Should we allow them to see this? Are we scaring them when they're in the classrooms and they hear all these fake cap gun shots and bullets that are being fired, etc.? Well, respectfully, everyone has their own thoughts and ideas. We all have our own opinions on things, respectfully. And this is my personal point of view. We do need to educate our kids on this. Why? Because this is the world that they're going to be living in. This is what they're going to be experiencing on a daily basis on the news and seeing what's going on around our country. They're the ones that are going to be needing the education, the ones that are going to be at the forefront saying, hey, we need to change this policy. We need some extra protection here. We need some extra security around the schools, etc. People have a tendency to listen to kids because kids are more often than not going to tell the truth. And we need to listen to that truth and understand that coming from them, that will be an impetus for us to make changes, to adjust our daily activities and perhaps make things a little bit more uncomfortable for those that are not so nice people and that are the evil ones that are trying to cause a lot of havoc. Continual concerns regarding safety will always be there. We don't know when. That's the problem. But through training and education, through taking proper security measures, allowing police officers to come and walk through the schools and see what may need to be updated, offering some suggestions, offering some trainings, letting the students know who the officers are within their community. This creates a little bit more of a relaxed atmosphere than who's that? Why are they over here? What are they doing in our school? This way, everyone knows, and they're all on the same page. A little less traumatizing for the psychological aspect of this. And once again, if, God forbid, if anyone has been involved in an active threat, active shooter situation, and this psychological footprint, it might not appear tomorrow, but it might appear a week, a month, a year from now, depending on the person, and something that might trigger that incident. It might be another active threat, active shooter situation on TV that person happens to see and then goes, uh-oh. And then it goes, I remember when I was in that situation. I remember when I was scared. And how did that happen? And I remember losing a good friend of mine just several days after that because of this certain circumstance. These are the things that happen. The same thing occurs with our first responders and EMS personnel, as well as our police departments, our fire departments, and those that are involved in the active threat, active shooter situations. It takes a very special person to enter into a building where a situation is going to arise, where most people are trying to either hide or run out. And our first responders and our police officers and fire departments are the ones that are either backing them up or running towards that particular subject in order to mitigate that circumstance. Thus, that psychological footprint might be there for quite some time. Not only in the people that may be impacted immediately from within that classroom, for example, but also those who are responding to that situation. And once again, keep in mind that one person dies every 12 seconds in an active threat, active shooter situation. And that's a number that you need to realize is very important, because on an average, it takes about 10 to 12 minutes for the average police department to respond, based on calls, based on locality, based on situations, etc. If it happens to be a little bit longer where they're tied up in an accident, then you're going to need some other jurisdictions to respond, and thus the casualty count may be a little bit higher due to the fact that the response time may be lagging. Not to the fault of the police officers that are going to be responding out there, but due to the fact that they may be tied up with some other situation and other units might be needed to be called in. So keep that in mind too when you're dealing with an active threat, active shooter situation. It may seem like an eternity for that 10 minutes, and understandably so, because this is an extremely frightening situation. However, you do have to understand too that the police are going to be there as quickly as they can to mitigate the circumstance. Again, more training for schools and facilities and employees are needed out there. Personal opinion. Debate going to be currently ongoing with younger children and grade schools and grammar schools and middle schools. Some of the continual concerns are going to be out there regarding safety procedures, and trying to get things organized for the schools as well as businesses and other locations. And then understanding that the psychological footprint is going to be there for probably quite some time, or perhaps it's going to be something that may be over with immediately. Again, my two favorite words, it depends. And it will depend on the people that are involved in that situation and how they cope and how they deal with that particular event. So how do we put all this together? Not only with what we just discussed today in our lecture here with Ebola and active threat, active shooter, but also in dealing with our class in general. Well, emergency services management encompasses having a good leader and being able to lead and run the operation, even with numerous personalities that are perhaps going to be conflicting with one another. A good leader is going to need to be flexible, also being able to follow policy at times, all the time, in order to minimize some of the legalities that are out there. Also being a visionary, and also being fair with all the personnel that are involved in those situations. Keep in mind, flexibility is being able to follow that policy, and you can't just go in there and say, okay, let me take a look at page 15. Oh my gosh, it doesn't say that on page 15. We can't continue this event any longer. The event doesn't know that policy doesn't cover that. I'm sure you're aware of that. I mean, you need to be flexible in the sense that you need to follow policy, because that is the guideline. That is what was written, and that's what has been said. You need to also be flexible, because a lot of the things that are in the policy may not be covering the event, and it takes a turn to the right or it takes a turn to the left, and you need to address those situations. A good leader will be a visionary as well, understanding the conceptualization of the event, how it's going to be dynamic, when it's going to change, who the key stakeholders are that are involved, and how to address those issues and when to address those issues at the right time. And then being fair with all personnel that are involved in these situations. And being in several incident command situations, as well as being a training officer on the fire department, I listened to my personnel as well as the people around me. And I found that it was very beneficial to take their thoughts and ideas and put them into practice, having stakeholder buy-in. You can't take everyone's thoughts and ideas, because otherwise you'll have a policy that'll be about 5,000 pages. But if you can take a little bit of accolades from each person and tie it into perhaps that person's strong with the mission statement. Well, you can take that person's mission statement. You can take another person's thought and idea on a certain policy and add a couple paragraphs in that policy that person happened to develop and tweak it, whatever the policy may be, according to legal counsel or the president and the other executive staff. There's a lot involved in dealing with that. But being fair with people and being very down to earth and human with people, and not talking above them and directing them all the time, will definitely allow you to have the opportunity to have a stronger team, a better sense of leadership, and they will respect you even more so because you actually care about what they have to say. So good leaders going to be flexible. They're going to follow policy. They're also going to be a visionary and seeing things that are coming down the way, and also being able to be fair with people and treat them with dignity and respect. So what's in the future for leaders? Well, we have our hands full. We have National Incident Management System, the Hospital Incident Command System, and being the incident commander. That's what NIMS, HICS, and IC are all standing for. And then under the umbrella of NIMS, then comes many challenges with that leadership that they're going to face. It's going to be a difficult situation. It's going to be hard to monitor a lot of these areas, and it's also going to be something that you need to be aware of as a leader. My big thing is that you need to be transparent at all times, and that communication piece is going to be very critical for transparency, due to the fact that your people are going to know whether or not you're lying to them. People are smart. They'll figure it out, as well as the press, when you need to do something live and in situations such as that within that incident command system or that incident management system. So be aware that you are communicating not only with people that are with you, but also community stakeholders, and those stakeholders involve members of the press that are dealing with social media. So remember that the leadership trends for the future are going to be dealing with NIMS, HICS, and being an IC or the incident commander at times. NIMS is going to come under many challenges that the leader is going to face during those disasters, during those certain circumstances that are going to arise, and you're going to need to promote unity. And finally, there, transparency. Transparency is going to be critical when you bounce off of thoughts and ideas, as well as saying, hey, I made a mistake on this. I need to change that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, and then moving forward. That's a good designation for a good leader, and how the leader is going to perform, and how the team will eventually follow that leader through transparency and honesty. Furthermore, here in one of our last slides, you can see that there's a use of different technology that's going on. Technology is growing leaps and bounds, and something changes, I think, every 3 to 4 months now rather than 6 months, because of everything that is being developed and how technology is making improvements in our daily and occupational lives. Communication and communication schematics. We can text somebody, we have social media, we have videos on our phones, taking pictures and such, and we can post them to social media within minutes of being able to download something on our phones and putting it out there. And then enhancing the possibility of being a visionary by identifying the risks out there. And that comes from experience, training, and education and leadership. And then one problem involves an improved collaborative effort among organizations and agencies. You all know that one person always wants to be in charge and kind of steal the limelight, shall we say. It is just one of those things that happens, and then you have others that just want to stay back and do what they're supposed to do. And many times there's going to be some disagreements, shall we say. It's okay to respectfully disagree as captains, for example, or if you're in charge of a certain situation and someone comes in with a different thought and idea and challenges you. It's okay to respectfully disagree. But in front of other people, and screaming and shouting never challenges a good finish. It destroys a finish, in fact. What you need to do is, when you're out there, you need to respectfully disagree and perhaps pull that other person on the side and talk about it on the side, not in front of the other crew members or not in front of the other people that are there that perhaps may be hearing what is going on. Because dissension starts with the top, and if it starts at the top, it's going to run like rampant, just like a drop of dye in some water, and it's going to impact and infect the other people that are within that operation. Again, different technology is going to continually evolve every 3 to 4 months. Some things are going to definitely change. One thing in life is constant, is definitely change. The communication and the communication schematics are part of that communication change and that technological change. And also, enhancing the skills of being a visionary is going to take a lot of time and effort with leadership, but also through training, education, and basically being able to handle certain circumstances that may be uncomfortable at the time, but also providing a real life experience. And then understanding that a collaborative effort is going to be needed between agencies, as well as those that are in supervisory positions or executive staff positions. Communication is going to be the key, and being able to come up with one solid communicative message. The industry-related politics can also play an integral role in what is occurring there. And we have to understand, too, that politics are going to play a major, major force in any area that we're dealing with emergency management. So future leaders are needing to consider that. We also need to look at some of the areas that are similar to politics and what the public perception is going to be of what we are handling, how we are handling that situation, and dealing with some of the life-saving efforts that we are involved in. One thing we need to be aware of, too, is terrorism. Terrorism and the potential risk that is going to be associated with that particular act. Acts of terrorism are continually growing globally, and we need to be aware that that is going to be at the forefront of cyber terrorism, also man-made terrorism, and some of these natural disasters that we see that are occurring out there can be a form of terrorism. We often hear that the nuclear age is starting to fade away, and then we have bioterrorism that is becoming more and more prevalent and worrisome and troublesome. So the frequency of those events, too, are going to make an impact upon us in one form or another. So again, politics are going to play an integral role in emergency management. We have an area that's going to be very similar to politics, and that's going to be the public perception of what has taken place, and then we have to worry about the types of terrorism that are going to be evolving, whether it's going to be natural or human-made, and then the frequency of those events. So in summary, one, what is the impact that leadership is going to have upon each and every one of us? Well, it's going to depend on the person. It's going to depend on the training and the evaluation that is going to take place after an event is completed. The good leader is going to have the ability there to make a good judgment with his or her knowledge and influence other people in a positive social manner, hopefully. But the ability there to address many situations is going to be critical and an integral role for that leader to follow and handle active threat, Ebola, or whatever the disaster situation may be. The good leader is going to be able to believe in his or her employees and the staff, the team members that are going to be involved. They're going to be flexible, offering suggestions and leaving rooms for opportunities in the future, not only for themselves, but to their staff and team members as well. And more importantly, they're going to encourage their team members and people to strive to be the best of their ability, regardless of what the situation may be at the time. Positive impact, positive injections, and positive accolades are exactly what is needed from the leader when times of strife are there, and when people feel depressed, when people feel that there is going to be no hope, and when there's going to be an opportunity to make a difference or make a change. The good leader is going to have that window of opportunity to see and take and seize that operation. With that, I greatly appreciate your attention for our last collaborative session for this course. I hope that you enjoyed this session as well as the course. I wish you best of luck in both your academic and occupational endeavors. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. You have my phone number as well as my email address, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions that you may have. Once again, thank you so much for your participation in the course, and I do wish you all the best of luck.